Ladies and gentlemen, our next panel is Our Nation's Military, Transforming Their Energy Future. Here to moderate the panel is the Energy and Environment correspondent from the National Journal Daily, Amy Harder.
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here and for our panelists. I'll introduce them really quickly. This is Richard Kidd. He's Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Army for Energy and Sustainability. Next to him is Dorothy Robyn, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Environment. And at the end is Susan Story. She's President and CEO of 7 Company Services. Well, as you all know, the military is a major user of electricity. In some places in the United States, in fact, the Army itself is the largest user of electricity in the US. Today, we are going to talk about some of the military's goals related to energy, including energy efficiency, renewable energy, distributed power, microgrids, and energy security. We are also working to help with the military to help them move forward to meet their energy-related needs and goals. We are also going to talk about how the military is leading in the areas of renewable energy. For this panel, the focus is primarily going to be energy use in the United States at military installations where utilities are the providers of electricity to the military. So we will not be focusing on oil and gasoline provided to the troops deployed abroad. We'll leave that to a future panel, as I'm sure you've seen on the agenda. And the panel format is this. I will let them talk for a couple of moments with some opening thoughts. And then then I'll ask a couple of questions, and we'll take questions from the audience. There will be electronic only, so please either text message or tweet your questions to me, and then they'll appear on the screen above me, in front of me, and we can get the discussion going that way. So Richard, why don't we start with you?
Great. Well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Edison Foundation for giving me the opportunity to be here with you today and to talk about the Army's role as it moves to be a more energy-secure Army. I'd also like to thank Dr. Dorothy Robyn for the leadership that she provides to the Army and the other services in her role as Deputy Undersecretary. As you just heard, the Army is the largest facility energy user in the federal government. We represent about 20% of the government's electric use. We have 155 installations across America with over 200 utility providers, a factoid that I'm still trying to figure out. As the Army looks to the future on its installation energy efforts, one of the key drivers for what we do are the requirements given us by Congress. In fiscal year 2012 National Defense Authorization, it stated that energy projects must contribute to energy security, which is defined as having assured access to reliable supplies of energy and the ability to protect and deliver sufficient energy for mission essential requirements. This definition is a good one, but the department needs to do more work and get a higher level of clarity as to what type of protection for how long against what type of threat. Regardless of how these policy questions are answered, an energy-secure Army installation has 3 attributes: energy-efficient buildings, on-site power generation or power storage of some sort, and a smart microgrid to connect the two. Now, to answer those sort of in order, what is the Army doing to develop these attributes on our installations? Over the past years, the Army has taken significant steps to improve the energy efficiency on our installations. We've instituted a number of policies. We've adopted ASHRAE 189.1 as our building code, and we have worked through the budget process to triple the amount of appropriations that we will apply on our built environment. Additionally, we are supplementing these investments through partnerships with energy service companies and our utilities. And this morning at the National Association of Energy Service Companies, I announced that the Army has over $900 million of performance contracts in its pipeline, which is twice what the President challenged us to do in his memorandum of December of this year. Smart microgrids, the connection between the efficiency and the generation, are critical in terms of providing efficiency gains, easing the integration of renewable and other power sources, and providing essential energy security attributes. The Army is making investments in a variety of microgrid efforts across our complex at Fort Sill, Fort Hunter Liggett, in Afghanistan, and the largest one at Fort Carson, which will have vehicle-to-grid capabilities integrated into it. One of the challenges of these microgrid projects is identifying a value that we can place on energy security that we can then use to engage either with Congress or with private entities to leverage financing. One of the ways I think that we can help solve this problem is looking to design installations in such a way that they can provide ancillary services to the local utility that the utility will value and help pay for, such as demand response, power management, power quality, even black start capability. So we're looking and thinking along those lines. Finally, I'd like to just talk about the challenge and development of baseload power production on Army installations. Before I go too far for this audience, I want to be very clear that I do not see a need or a desire for the Army installations to permanently island from the grid. We are not talking about setting up separate and competing utilities, but rather about providing energy security on our installations in the event that the grid goes down. As indicated, we would like to design our installations in such a manner that they have attributes and characteristics that are of value to our utility partners. The trend in the past decade, and we think is a good one, has been to get the military out of power production. The need now is to identify ways to get the power production capability back on the installations, but not necessarily with the Department of Defense or the Army as the operator. The Army does not want to own and operate power plants, just to have access to the secure power when needed. In regards to large-scale renewable energy projects, the Army has taken an effort to streamline how we develop these projects. We created the Energy Initiatives Task Force, or the EITF, the purpose of which is to accelerate development of large-scale, we consider 10 megawatt and larger, renewable energy projects across the Army enterprise. We want the EITF to do for business processes on renewables what we've recently done for business processes on ESPCs. EITF is going to invest money in sound due diligence of renewable energy projects to provide industry a clear understanding and confidence that they can work with the Army and that they can get financing for projects on the Army. Part of this project will be development of site-specific analysis of regulation, requirements, incentives, portfolio standards, etc. Local utilities will be involved early on in the process and will have an opportunity, in many cases, to propose solutions. Right now, the EITF is working 15 specific individual projects on Army installations. Working with DOE, we built a number of models. We right now feel that there are at least 81 opportunities across the Army to produce large amounts of renewable power at or below grid parity rates. We are looking at geothermal, solar, wind, biomass, and waste-to-energy projects, and we expect that over the next 10 years, the EITF will leverage between $5 and $7 billion of private investment using the Army's power purchase agreement authorities, 5 to 7 billion, 10 years, power purchase authorities. We do recognize that renewable power in most cases, or in some cases, will provide only intermittent power. We are looking at projects that can be coupled with either energy storage technologies or other baseload generation projects. In conclusion, the Army is working diligently to improve energy security posture of our facilities through enhanced energy efficiency, improved grid infrastructure, and development of on-site power generation. I'm pleased to be able to say that so far we've received very positive feedback from your industry on our efforts, and I look forward to a strong working relationship in the future and to your questions.
Great. Dorothy?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. In addition to overseeing energy issues from the Office of the Secretary of Defense, I oversee basing issues, and we've recently requested 2 additional rounds of BRAC, base realignment and closure. So I have been testifying on BRAC, and I have been the piñata on Capitol Hill. So I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to to speak to a group that is not saying nasty things to me, at least not yet. I can't not repeat a little bit of what Richard said. I look at things from the perspective of the Office of Secretary of Defense. I don't run anything the way that the services do. It's a policy oversight job. But let me give you my perspective on it, and then talk about a couple of the things that I actually do, programs that I do run from my office. It's as Richard said, we're a huge energy user. If you take all DoD-wide, 1% of all U.S. demand, and that is driven by our building infrastructure, 300,000 buildings, 2.2 billion square feet of space, which is 3 times that of Walmart, 6 times that of the General Services Administration. So it's a very large footprint. We also have 28 million acres of land on which we test and train. And more than half of that is land that belongs to the Department of Interior, which has been withdrawn for military purposes, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Our overall strategy, and Richard really hit on the elements, it's reduced demand first and foremost, like Secretary Chu said. Energy efficiency is not just the low-hanging fruit, it's the fruit laying on the ground. So that is first and foremost getting the demand down in those, and it's focused on the 300,000 buildings that we have. We are making all new construction very sustainable and green, but the emphasis is on our new buildings, and third-party financing, as Richard said, is critical. But in addition, we do have $1 billion of appropriated funds in the budget to tackle that directly through energy efficiency retrofits. And the other thing I would add there is the importance of data and metering. We do a lousy job currently of collecting data on the energy performance of our buildings. Most of our buildings are not metered. We don't have good data with which to identify the opportunities for investment and to benchmark. So my office has new policy coming out that will require meters on many more buildings, and also we've been leading the effort to develop an energy information management system. On the supply side, that's the second element of our strategy, is expand the supply of renewable and other on-site sources. It could be natural gas, could be geothermal. And let me just let me mention 2 things that Richard didn't talk about. Just to give you a sense of how well situated some of our installations are, we did a study last year done by a consulting firm called ICF of the solar potential on 9 military installations located in the Mojave and the Colorado deserts in California and Nevada. They ended up focusing on the ones in California. They took 96% of the land off the table because it was incompatible with solar, because we're testing and training there. It's just emission incompatibility, and also the presence of the desert tortoise and a variety of other things. So they narrowed it down to 4% of the land, but just that 4%, and if you look at just what's economically feasible, it's still, the potential is very great, specifically 7,000 megawatts of solar potential. So 7 gigawatts, that's equivalent to seven nuclear power plants. That's the potential on what comes down to 4 installations, including Fort Irwin and maybe another Army base. Just Fort Irwin, okay. A lot of space on Fort Irwin. One of the issues, big issues that we need to deal with, there are two big impediments to moving forward on some of that land. One is transmission, and that's a bigger issue than the Department of Defense. The other is, as I said, a lot of that land is withdrawn from the Department of Interior, and there are some issues that we need to work out with Interior, and they're not easy. We have the authority to do renewable on certain lands that are withdrawn from Interior, but it's ambiguous on others. So the statutes that provide for the withdrawal of that land for military purposes are ambiguous, and then the revenue collection issue is also an ambiguous one. So there's some very serious issues, and we have a great partner with Interior to do that. They're very supportive. Let me say one last thing, and this cuts across microgrids and other things. The Department of Defense is a technology innovator. That's what we do. For 200 years, we have been the most effective engine of technological innovation, and there's no reason that shouldn't be the case in this space as well. Richard talked about what we're doing in microgrids. An office that I oversee has created what's called an installation energy testbed. And the notion here is that because we have 300,000 buildings, we look at risk differently. If we try out 10 technologies, and these are technologies that are pre-commercial, that are facing the valley of death, if you will, that are not facing, they are facing impediments to commercialization, we want to see them commercialized so that we can incorporate them into retrofits in our 300,000 buildings. So what we do is demonstrate these technologies. It's a distributed testbed. This goes on at installations all over the country, and we're doing it with microgrids as well. It's typically a 2 to 3 year demonstration process with very, very rigorous data collection efforts. There is a very deep culture of test and evaluation in the Department of Defense. So this kind of activity is something that we do very well. For those technologies that prove out, we then can help to jumpstart the market, as we've done with many, many other technologies. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, Susan.
In Southern Company, we're very fortunate to have 30 military installations in Georgia, Alabama, North Florida, and Mississippi. And just kind of personally, having been CEO of Gulf Power in Northwest Florida that had 9 of those installations, what we found was having the military there is wonderful for 3 purposes. One is it's tremendous economic development for the area. Second is the men and women in the military tend to be the ones who are volunteering first and most, whether it's Habitat for Humanity, Girls Club, Boys Club, they're the first ones there. I led the restoration efforts after 2 hurricanes, and at the Civic Center where people were going to flee the hurricanes, the Navy was in there helping people set up pallets. It was really remarkable. And also that the men and women who protect our freedoms and those of other people around the world whom they'll never know, we get the opportunity to be with them in the communities. So I know I speak for a lot of utilities, all of our utilities, that we feel very blessed when we have the opportunity and privilege to serve the military installations that our men and women train them to go out and defend freedom across the world. Practically, what we do at Southern Company in the 3 areas, and Richard and Dr. Robyn mentioned these, I want to talk just a little bit about some things we're doing in energy security, in energy efficiency or broader energy services, and then I want to pull out renewables separate because it's related to energy security, but there's a special focus on that. First thing is energy security. We have one of our Air Force bases in Georgia, which is a 50 megawatt load, but we actually have 2 80 megawatt combustion turbines on site. It is part of our normal generation mix. It is paid for by all of our customers. It is utilized for all of our customers unless there is an emergency or a catastrophe, at which point Robyn's Air Force Base is able to island off, and they have first priority for the power coming out of there. And it is much more than they even need at the base. So that's one thing from energy security. The second thing, however, is what we do and should be doing every day in electric utility, which is a reliable grid. We have invested over $1 billion in Southern Company on smart grid just in the past 20 years, remote monitoring, remote activation, smart meters. And in fact, one of the projects that we did in energy services at one of our Air Force bases was to Dr. Robyn's point, they had 1 metering point. When we rolled our smart meters out, they wanted multiple metering points so that they could monitor certain sections of buildings to manage their energy more. So the energy security from a reliability, and our reliability numbers for transmission and distribution, SAIFI and SAIDI, the frequency and duration of outages, is actually better today within Southern Company than it's been in 10 years. So the basic system, the rollout of smart devices, and the ability to work with these installations so that they can island off when needed, but where we can work it in our generation mix to have it part of our general generation mix so that it's not a cost burden on the military installation at the time. The second area is in energy services, and most of that focus is energy efficiency. The CT was $40 million in 1994. Southern Company has worked with our military installations for a total of $231 million worth of investments. We've started tracking since 2002 how much we're saving in kilowatt hours and money. And today, because of the projects just Southern Company, Alabama Power, Georgia Power, Mississippi Power, and Gulf Power have done with our military installations, those installations are saving over 74 million kilowatt hours a year because of the direct projects we've done, and over $10 million a year that we can directly attribute to these projects. These are things like, a lot of our bases, a lot of the buildings were built post-World War II, but pretty soon after World War II. So going in and retrofitting, to Dr. Robyn's point and Richard's point, it's one thing, all the new buildings are the most energy efficient possible, but to be able to go in and retrofit, we're replacing chillers, for example, and through the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, Hank Courtwright's here, they're doing a lot of research into end-use electro-technologies that are much more energy efficient. We, because we participate, pilot some of those, and we put the military at the top of the order in terms of places that we'll put those pilots, because it's free of cost for them, and we're able to test things like lighting that's 50 to 80% more energy efficient, like these chillers where you have a heat recovery heat pump so that you take the heat off the chillers and you get free or greatly reduced costs for water heating because you're able to take that. So we want to make sure that our energy services, whether it is chillers, HVAC, lighting upgrades, which we have tremendously more efficient lighting, motor upgrades, not just for electricity, but the military is also, as we are very interested in water conservation. So where you can upgrade motors that not only use less electricity, but significantly require less water, it's a great investment. So that's another area which is we, through our energy services within our companies, go in, work with the military installations, we do the audits, we work with them on a plan, and then we look at what they can get the biggest hit for quickest for the least amount of money, and we work with them to bring in subcontractors we can manage to get that delivered for them. And then the third area of emphasis in renewables, and Richard mentioned it, we have 30 military installations. At this time, we're currently planning or in discussions with 10 of those for phase 1, some looking at the decision whether to go to phase 2 on looking at renewables capabilities on site. And in the southeast where we are, wind is not a viable option. You can look at the NREL maps, but we're looking at both solar and biomass opportunities. Our engineers are working with them, scoping out. We already have transmission on site. We have distribution in most cases on site. So we're working with them to scope out certain load characteristics, load amounts, cost for biomass solar, at what extent can it become part of our generation mix, at what part will the military have to pay. So we're working out all of that now on 10 of the 30 military installations that we have. So I say that to say, and I would tell you that of all the stuff we've done, the most exciting is probably what we haven't done yet, because there's a lot of things out there as we get new technologies, as we find new ways we can bring these things to bear, we all win. So just, kind of concluding, I will tell you that it's very personal for us at Southern. 11% of our employees in Southern Company are veterans, Guard, or Reserve. 11%. Last year, 14% of all the new hires that we hired into our company are veterans or Guard or Reserve. Last year, GI Jobs magazine named Southern Company the top utility for working people in the Guard and Reserve, and second only behind Amazon. And we won the Secretary of Defense Employer Support Freedom Award in 2010. We find, under the Troops Energy Program that Tom Farrell of EEI put together, he used a term I love, which is from the front lines to the power lines. So what we want to do is serve the military installations while they're training these men and women, and then we want to make sure that we are able to use that expertise by hiring a lot of them when they decide to leave the service.
Great. Well, and as a reminder, please feel free to tweet or text message questions. I will incorporate them into our discussion. But going off your comments, Susan, I want to talk about how what Dorothy commented about technology innovation. And you talked about the benefits of working with the military because of the veterans and that, but how does working with the military and providing electricity for them provide you a unique and perhaps accelerated path to more innovative technologies? In other words, what can you do with the military that you're not able to do without the military, and how does that partnership work from the private sector's perspective?
I will broaden this. Instead of Southern, let me talk about general industry. We all know that we have GPS, we have GIS because of the military, right? I will tell you that in working with the military when I was in Florida, I got to see the research that's going on in terms of making sure that in the Middle East that you don't spend so much time and effort and money trying to bring gasoline and diesel, and that they were doing a tremendous amount of work on solar, looking at the same type of technologies we are so that they can become self-sufficient. That is wonderful news, I think, for our whole industry, that we can help, they can learn from us, we can learn from them, and everybody benefits just like all the other innovations that we've enjoyed as a culture and as a nation because of what the military's done. And I want to go back to what I mentioned earlier. The utility industry does a lot of research through EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute. As they're developing in-use technologies, again, we should give preference to the military because we can test things with the military in ways that they can show us different ways to use this technology we may not think about in our normal industrial customers. So that's just a couple of things I think about when I think about ways that we could partner with the military.
Dorothy, you're shaking your head. Do you have any comments in reaction to that?
Well, no, I think that's, I wanted to, can I give a couple of examples
definitely.
of how, I didn't really get a chance to talk about this, but why we're such a powerful test bed, and I'll give an example from Susan's area. Landfills. We have 400 landfills. Some of them are very old. We generate electricity, baseload power off of landfills until they get really old. And once they get old, the BTU content of the waste gas is so low that we either have to vent it if it's in a non-attainment zone. In Susan's area, we flare it off. So we use energy in order to get rid of this low BTU content methane. We're working with a company called Flex Energy. They're testing a little micro turbine at Fort Benning. Actually, I think you were there for the rollout, weren't you?
Yep.
This is a technology that, if it works, and so far so good, it allows us to continue to generate electricity even with very low content, low quality waste gas. We've had an issue with an armadillo that that burrowed into the liner of the landfill and messed things up. That's why you do demonstrations, but it's going well. If it works here, there are dozens of other landfills that we have where it will work, and there literally are any number of municipalities that are watching this demonstration, because if it works for us, then it will work for them. Let me give you another example where our size allows us to do things that others don't do. Electrochromic windows. This is a window technology that the windows tint electronically. And that means that you're not getting all that unwanted solar heat in the summer. There are some advantages in the winter as well, but it means you can put in a smaller chiller. So in a new building or a major retrofit, you can put in a smaller chiller. That's huge. That's a huge potential savings. And this is a technology that the Department of Energy has been funding for quite a while, and venture capital now funding it, but the windows are still very expensive, and no architecture and engineering firm is going to take the risk on putting in a smaller chiller in a new building based on, marketing material from Solidyne, the company that makes it. I think there are two companies. So we're testing this technology on 3 sides of an entire building at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar to get that kind of real world experience with how this works. We're doing this on lots of different technologies and a bunch of different microgrids. And the experience that comes out of that is invaluable, and then, as I said earlier, we then can become a major customer.
Great, and let me take a question from the audience. What is the military and Southern Company doing to increase the use of electricity as a source of power for the transportation sector? Richard would be able to take that?
Sure, I'll start. The Army has the second largest non-tactical vehicle fleet in the federal government. And depending on the future of the Postal Service, we may have the largest soon. Last year, we were able to reduce the petroleum consumed in that fleet by 8%, an 8% reduction in 1 year. Most of that was done through both reducing the number of vehicles and right sizing, in other words, making sure the vehicles we had were more fuel efficient than the ones that they replaced. And we've been able to get about a 30% efficiency improvement in our replacement vehicles. We own and operate a number of different electronic vehicles of different shapes, makes, and models. But perhaps what is the most interesting is what's happening at Fort Carson, Colorado, where we are installing a microgrid, in part with funds mobilized through Dr. Robyn's office. And we've added our own funding through the Tank Automotive and Research Development Center at TARDAC to put in place what will be, we believe, the largest vehicle-to-grid power connection capacity in the country. And we're working with Smith Vehicles, I guess is one of the sponsors here, because we're interested in the fact that that vehicle has a lot more power storage than, say, a Prius. We're going to do some models. Of course, when we need the power the most during the peak times in the middle of the afternoon, we've also got a use for the vehicle. So how are we going to resolve some of these issues? But we're really excited about what's going to happen in Fort Carson because we think it will inform broader electrification of the Army's non-tactical vehicle fleet.
Do you have any comments?
Yes, there's two pieces here. On the transportation sector, you've got on-road and off-road. Let me talk about on-road, and Richard mentioned this. Through testing electric vehicles, we have electric service buckets. We're working a lot with installations on a lot of their on-the-site transportation. But an area that doesn't get a lot of play is off-road transportation. I want to give you an example. Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, the busiest airport in the United States, we worked with them to convert a lot of their ground equipment from diesel to electric. They're saving money, the emissions have gone down tremendously, and in fact it's been so successful that their new international concourse is going to be all electric. All the luggage carriers, the plane pools, all of that. So we're working with our military installation. That one is Hartsfield, the others we're working with our ports on big cranes. In fact, the Port of Savannah and the Port of Mobile, through electrifying some of the ship-to-shore cranes, we've avoided them purchasing 6.5 million gallons of diesel fuel a year by electrifying it, and it's cheaper for them. So what we want to do is we're working now with our military installations on a lot of the off-road transportation, on forklifts, on small vehicles, on cranes, on work that goes on within the bases, because we think that, in addition to the on-road, is a quick hit, that we've got the technology there, and it has tremendous savings in fuel, in emissions, and also in cost.
Do you think these are lessons that can be transferred into the civilian side of the economy and help move forward in that direction?
Right, and it already is. Like I said, actually the Port of Savannah, 23 ship-to-shore cranes, it's been so successful, these rubber-tired gentry cranes, that they hope to convert at the Port of Savannah, 170 of them in the next 10 years, because it's so much more, and they pay for themselves in less than 2 years just from fuel cost. But also when you're measuring emissions, because people will tell you diesel emissions are among the worst, and to be able to avoid those diesel emissions. So whether it's the military or private sector, the use of off-road transportation is very powerful, and we think there's a huge market for that, in addition to, though, the on-transportation and the vehicles.
Good. I want to switch topics a little bit to talk about the threats to cybersecurity threats. I know that's obviously a huge concern, intersection between the military and the electric industry. Whoever wants to start with that, I would like to talk about what challenges do you see going forward with that. I know there's bills pending in Congress right now that would revamp that. Richard or Dorothy, do either one of you have any comments on about that as to why you think that's important?
Well, I think it's another reason that that we worry about the energy security of our installations. The grid is potentially vulnerable, aging infrastructure, kinetic attack, cyber attack. As Richard said, we're not looking to go off the grid, but we are looking to have the capability that if there is a cyber attack or something else, we can maintain our critical activities. So I would say the main thing that we're doing is our work in the development of microgrid technologies. And there, we're not developing the technology. What we're doing is demonstrating technologies that commercial entities are themselves developing. And the same is true of storage. And some of those experiments some of those demonstrations are more geared towards cyber protection than others. There's one called Spiders that's being led by Sandia National Lab, that it has more of a focus on cyber than some of the other ones that we're doing.
Do you think, where would the middle ground be if you're not looking to have to go off the grid completely? Where is that?
By microgrid, Richard, you can elaborate on this, but so the renewable part of it would be using the renewable every day, generating power from the renewable and feeding that back onto the grid. You've got storage technology, which is still very expensive. This ability to shed non-essential load and to prioritize the critical load and keep that going with the use of a microgrid, that's something you would do in an emergency. I mean, that's something we would do 1% of the time. I mean, hopefully never. So it's a backup, and it's an alternative to our current backup strategy, which consists of generators with limited supplies of diesel fuel.
Richard or Susan, do either of you have more comments on that?
You know, as a utility, cybersecurity is, protecting our assets are one of the top things that we're responsible for doing. And there's a lot of things that we're doing at Southern Company. The $1 billion we spent on the smart grid helps a lot because we know what's going on without it. In the lines, we can remotely activate devices without having to send people out there. So it's very important. I think in the cyber area, some of the most promising things that have happened over the past few months are the increased communications between the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, FERC, and the utilities. And that's something we've had to proactively work on in terms of what information can we share. I know for us, sharing with these different agencies, what are you seeing? Here's something we saw, we caught. So I think this communication becomes critical. Cyber's critical for all of us in all different areas if you're in the utility. However, with the military especially so, there's a lot of discussion and communication that we can do on a very frequent basis so that we know what's going on and they know what's going on, and this partnership will make all the difference.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that because Edison Electric has been involved in that. We are working very closely with the utility industry on that and with NERC, and we have recently formed a partnership with 4 utilities in the National Capital Region to do as a kind of a case study to learn from how do we protect critical military installations in the event of some sort of an emergency, whether it's cyber or something else.
Great, let me take another question from the audience. If a renewable plant costs more than regulators would be willing to approve, would the military be willing to pick up the cost difference as a means of meeting its renewable energy goals? Dorothy or Richard?
Technically, we are authorized to pay a fair and reasonable premium for renewable power. No one knows what that premium is. No one knows what fair and reasonable is. I quite frankly think that the Army can meet all of its goals without paying more for renewable power. As I indicated, we have identified 81 potential projects that are at or below grid parity using renewable power. So how do we get renewable power at a lower price? Well, we offer a couple of things that developers should find attractive. Normally, we will offer land. So we'll give you essentially free land through an enhanced use lease. And then we will offer an agreement to purchase power at a stipulated rate for a very long period of time. We can go out to 30 years. So we will give a guaranteed commitment for 30 years of power purchase, either a fixed cost or some agreed upon escalation rate over that time. And so with that, in some cases we'll be the sole off-taker, or we will be a majority off-taker, and the developer or the utility can take that to the finance community and say, look, we've got a pretty sure thing here, so you're going to get lower cost of capital at the back end. So we think we can give you land, we can give you demand, and we can give you lower cost of capital.
Related to that question, a question for Dorothy is, how will your energy goals be affected by the military budget cuts, which is a huge discussion here in Washington?
Yeah, I think what I worry the most about is that when the defense budget goes down, MILCON, military construction, and then the related accounts, repair and maintenance, typically take a disproportionate hit, and that is true in this year's budget, so I worry about our ability to. We are putting $1 billion in for energy efficiency retrofits, but ideally you want to do those energy efficiency retrofits as part of the overall building renovation as opposed to just one-off things. So I worry about our ability to meet our energy intensity goal with the declining budget. It's why third-party financing, in particular the utility energy savings contracts that Susan talked about, the energy savings performance contracts are so critical. And in general, you will see us rely more and more on third-party financing to meet our goals.
Another question from the audience. There's been a lot of talk about good-scale renewable energy as a way to achieve energy security. Two related questions. First of all, when we talk about renewable, is it mainly wind and solar? I know that Susan mentioned biomass. And given these renewable energy sources are intermittent, how are you going to make up for that? Richard, I know you mentioned natural gas as a backup. How is that balance working out, and has that changed over the last couple of years with new discoveries of natural gas and the price of that being quite low?
Fortunately, I get the opportunity to respond to the direction of Congress. Congress has given us multiple definitions for what renewable power is in various pieces of legislation. But for the Army going forward, we're essentially looking at wind, waste, solar, geothermal, and biomass. In terms of natural gas, what I wanted to convey was that natural gas is a natural part of the energy solution, and that we can look to that in hybrid arrangements on our installations. Again, we got to work with Congress, because right now the Army has 16 installations sitting on top of marketable natural gas fields. But if we bring that gas up, all the proceeds go to the Treasury, and there's no incentive for the Army to develop those. And we'd like to engage with Congress and you guys to change that.
I would just add the importance of storage technologies. Storage is very expensive. My sense is, and I'm not an engineer, but that there is competition among a number of different storage technologies. It's not clear where that's going to come out, which is why we're demonstrating a bunch of them. But that's going to be an absolutely critical piece of this.
Great. Well, we are out of time, but I just want to say thank you so much for this great discussion. I learned some things, and I hope everybody did as well. And I would say thank you.